And a very good morning to you. How are you doing? It's Sunday morning, the 6th of September 2020. Sunday View with myself, Richie Allen, the first Sunday View for a while. Thanks for joining me. You know how to get in touch if you'd like to get in touch. Twitter is the way to do that. It's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter. A lot to talk about this morning on Sunday View. Lovely stuff.
It's the BBG, not the BBC. You're listening to the Richie Allen Radio Show, live from Salford in Greater Manchester.
It's the Richie Allen Show, broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Yes, and if you're new to the programme, this is a bit different. We look through the Sunday newspapers and we listen in to some of the mid-morning political talk programmes for about an hour. That is Sunday View. That's the gist of it for about an hour. And as I said, there's lots to get into today. It isn't entirely COVID-centric today, you'll be glad to hear. Well, there's a bit of COVID stuff around, but we can branch off into some weird and wonderful areas maybe as well. Good morning to Shona. How you doing, Shona? Good morning to Base Ninja, to Steve Burns. How you doing, Steve? I will be reading your tweets as we go along, so do tweet me liberally. Love to hear from you. Now, I understand that Piers Corbyn was arrested in Sheffield yesterday, and while the newspapers and the BBC did make mention of the anti-lockdown Stop the New Normal protest in Sheffield, none of them, as of yet anyway, mentioned the arrest of Piers Corbyn. That might change, you see, with we live in the online era now, don't we, of sorts, where newspapers are constantly updating their own websites. But the print versions of the newspapers didn't make any mention of the arrest of Piers Corbyn. Apparently, he was kept in a cell overnight. He didn't organise the protest. He was an invited speaker. If you're following what Piers Corbyn has been doing, you will know by now that he was arrested in Trafalgar Square, London, last weekend, and he was told, well, he was issued with a £10,000 fine. He's a regular guest on this programme. Any more news on that, I'll let you know as soon as I get it. But I know that his supporters are updating things on Twitter, so you'll get any news as soon as I get it. All right. Before we have a look at the newspapers then, let's have a tune, as is the custom on Sunday View. Good morning. Yeah, the genius of Brian Wilson, I nearly said the Bee Gees, the Beach Boys on Sunday View. It's me, Richie Allen. It's coming up for 5 minutes past 11 this Sunday. It's a nice one here in the Northwest. It's nice and pleasant. Had a nice old walk around the park this morning. Met my usual park mates. Yes. Anyway, the papers are somewhat Brexit-centric this morning. Somewhat. We'll have a look at the front pages right now. Sunday Express, PM wants EU to get real. The Express reports Boris Johnson will consider starving the European Union of access to cheap money on the financial markets in the event no long-term trade deal can be agreed. The transition period supposedly ending at the end of this year. The Mail on Sunday, this time we won't blink, is the headline. The Prime Minister's chief negotiator, Lord Frost, has given an interview to the Mail on Sunday. He says that the UK won't blink in talks this week. And he makes clear, apparently, that Johnson's government and him as the trade negotiator, they were adopting a more steely and determined approach than that of Theresa May. It's all lies, don't believe it. The Sunday Times, MPs unite in defence of free speech. This is interesting. This is about the blockade yesterday of newspaper printing plants by the climate change protest people. And this is in a couple of the papers today. So the Sunday Times reports that ministers are speaking up for press freedom. Apparently 1.5 million papers were prevented from leaving the printing presses yesterday, and people are waking up to the reality they won't have a paper today. Yes, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, quoted by the Times as saying a free press is vital in holding the government and other powerful institutions to account. Insert joke there. There is no free press and there is no holding of governments to account by any newspaper these days or television programme news programme otherwise. Now, the Sunday Telegraph, Extinction Rebellion facing organised crime curbs. The organisation behind the protests over the weekend could be treated as an organised crime group in the future, according to the Sunday Telegraph. This is Camilla Tominey, the associate editor of the Sunday Telegraph, complaining that the campaigners only want a free press. Extinction Rebellion, that is, only wants a free press if it agrees with their agenda. Front page of the Sun, we'll come back to that in a minute. Front page of the Sunday Mirror, Harry and Meghan in Diana show talks. You heard about this. Netflix have done a deal with Harry and his wife Meghan to produce content for Netflix, and part of the deal will be a documentary or a tribute to the former Princess of Wales, Diana, who was killed in 1997, was it? August 97. The Observer leads with COVID could be endemic in deprived parts of the country. This is a leaked Public Health England document, and it suggests that COVID-19 could be endemic in the UK, in parts of the UK, with a combination of severe deprivation, poor housing, and large minority ethnic communities. Yes. Bolton is in a serious lockdown at the moment. There are calls for Salford to be locked down again and all the businesses closed down. It's nonsense. We'll talk more about it in a minute. And the Daily Star on Sunday leads with Mystic Nag. Mystic Nag is the headline. And this is about a woman who spoke to a horse whisperer. And the horse whisperer told the woman that her horse had a message about some future love interest, and it all came true apparently. The horse predicted how things were going to go in this woman's love life. That's the Star on Sunday. Makes more sense to me than some of the other front page headlines today. So on Extinction Rebellion preventing newspaper printing and the possibility it might be recategorised as an organised crime group, this from Camilla Tominey in the Sunday Telegraph. Just a couple of snippets here. Under the government's plans, a new subversion power would protect critical national infrastructure from protesters, namely printing plants, Parliament and the courts. These would be deemed to be key pillars of democracy. Printing plants, Parliament and the courts. Right, so a senior government source said it would be illegal to stop MPs going to vote, judges going to court, and it would also protect a free press. Changes to Public Order Act would also stop protest groups entering specially defined areas outside of key sites. You see, this is problem, reaction, solution right there, right here. Ultimately, they want to eventually kind of ease out, eventually remove your right of protest, my right of protest. This is classic problem, reaction, solution. So they're saying that we will categorise key sites that people cannot protest at. The Met Police yesterday handed out £10,000 fines for breaching COVID-19 rules to more than 20 Extinction Rebellion protesters. So Piers Corbyn supporters, you've got your answer there. Why is Piers Corbyn being treated differently to Black Lives Matter protesters and Extinction Rebellion protesters? Well, apparently it's not the case with respect to Extinction Rebellion, because allegedly 20 of those protesters have been hit with a £10,000 fine too. And this is what made me giggle. Some of these Extinction Rebellion protesters were pushing a boat around London's roads. A boat called Lightship Greta. The boat has apparently since been seized. The Lightship Greta, eh? Love Greta.
They sweep their mess under the carpet for our generation to clean up and solve.
How dare you! You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words. People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction. How dare you!
Yes, Greta news. The Lightship Greta being pushed around London. Now, on the preventing of printing presses, printing and distributing the country's national newspapers, here's the editor of the Sunday Express, Michael Booker, on Sky News this morning. Sunday Express editor Michael Booker on, well, freedom of the press.
A lot of the public will be scratching their heads to see why Extinction Rebellion for so long have seemed to be allowed to get away with a lot more than what the general public would do if they were out on a protest. I seem to remember, I think it was last year, just before their first protest started, there was a story in the Mail on Sunday when they were recruiting people. And they seemed to be openly talking about things which could get you arrested. And they were wanting to get arrested. And I think even then people were scratching their heads saying, well, that's not really protest, is it? And I think as it's gone along, the vast majority of people do believe in climate change, do, in a soft way.
According to who?
Get behind their message. But as they've gone along, they've lost a lot of friends. They've lost a lot more on Friday night and Saturday morning with the action at the print plants. 1.5 million people didn't get their paper yesterday. It's a vital source for many people, elderly people, particularly through the pandemic, have relied on it for information. But I think people will be scratching their heads to wonder how they've got away for it for so long, because we do support popular protest in this country, but you can only do so much. And they have stepped over the line. And I think a lot of people will be wondering why the police weren't more robust. And we were right behind the Prime Minister and Priti Patel in calling for these stronger actions.
But apparently they've handed out £10,000 fines to 20 protesters. If there's any truth in that, I don't know. The former Shadow Home Secretary Diane Abbott was on Sophie Ridge on Sunday, and unsurprisingly, she wouldn't condemn the action taken against the newspapers, Diane Abbott.
I think it's important to remind ourselves is that direct action, which is what those actions were, is actually legal. We also saw over the weekend blockading of the port of Dover by far-right and anti-immigrant activists like Britain First and the EDL. These tactics are legal, whatever we think of the people practicing them.
So what do you think of the tactics of Extinction Rebellion? The Labour MP Don Butler tweeted yesterday before deleting the tweet, "Bravo, Extinction Rebellion, excellent work." Did she get it right the first time in your view?
I can repeat what I've said. These are legal tactics, and we don't want to talk as if it's not illegal to take direct action, because direct action has been legal since the time of the suffragettes.
I mean, there are reports this morning that the government is looking at reclassifying Extinction Rebellion as an organised crime group. Do you think that would be a good move?
That would be ridiculous. They're not criminals. They are protesters and activists in the tradition of the suffragettes and the hunger marchers of the 1930s.
The suffragettes, really?
I mean, you're saying that they're in the tradition of the suffragettes and the hunger marchers. I mean, some people listening to you may think that this is exactly the kind of worrying impact of cancel culture that some people are concerned about, trying to shut down voices that you disagree with, trying to stop the free press, and actually that you should be taking a much tougher line on Extinction Rebellion.
I'm taking a tough line on people's freedoms under law. We don't want to, in the COVID era, move into a time when people's freedoms are being clamped down on. Direct action is a legal tactic. It was used by the far right in Dover this weekend, and the same papers complaining about blockades were not complaining about anti-immigrant activist blockading Dover, and actually blockading ports is potentially far more damaging to the British economy than what happened at the newspaper plants.
I just want to read Labour's response to Extinction Rebellion, which was: "A free press is vital for our democracy. People have the right to read the newspapers they want. Stopping them from being distributed and printers from doing their jobs is wrong." Do you agree with the official Labour line on this, then?
I think it's right that people do have the right to read what newspapers are saying, the articles, the commentary and so on. Fortunately, every single word that these newspapers are saying is available online.
Ridge could have dug down into the right-wing anti-immigrant protests in Dover and asked her, did she endorse then their right to protest? Are you saying that you endorsed their right to do that even though you disagree with them on immigration? Could have dug down a little bit on that. Diane Abbott there, mad as a box of frogs. Millions of older people don't have an online presence and need the paper. Crazy. Anyway, back in a minute. Loads more to talk about. Sunday View, 17 minutes past the hour with me, the BBG.
Renowned healer Mark Bayersky travels the world to find the most unique and powerful crystals for self-healing. Since the ancient times, crystals have been used as healing tools. They hold a natural healing vibration and are highly charged in positive energy. Mark teaches how to channel the universal energy and transfer it to the crystal to activate its healing power. Each crystal is used for its unique ability to target a different physical or emotional challenge. Mark Bayersky is an author, healer, speaker, and founder of the Pure Energy Healing Academy. He shares powerful messages of inspiration and healing on his daily YouTube videos, reaching millions worldwide. Mark's crystals, healing oils, and incense sticks are most sought after by other healers. His collection is available online at www.markbayersky.com. His work is presented through Lemon House, a company that creates and curates consciously made gifts.
Welcome back to Sunday View with me, Richie Allen. How you doing? Are you well this morning? This is Sunday morning, the 6th of September. You all right? You are? You keeping sane? You're managing to hang on in there because things are mad, eh? A couple of funny stories in the mail on Sunday, just to get away from coronavirus and all of that for a moment. And I look into these. You can't take anything you read in any newspaper at face value. You must have a little look into it yourself. And it's easy enough to do, because in newspaper stories generally tend to quote people, and those people can be found online. So you can determine whether the newspaper has taken liberties with the claims made in the articles or not. And here's a couple of stories about the paradigm shift we've witnessed in recent years. It's become known as woke culture, hasn't it? It's become known as woke, the era of wokeness, woke culture, cancel culture. Mad stuff going on. A couple of quick stories. The Mail on Sunday, here's a headline for you. Bristol University bans fitness instructors from telling students to lose weight because it is fat phobic, as woke warriors now attack thin privilege on UK campuses. And I had to do a bit of digging to see if anybody really coined the phrase or the term thin privilege, and they have. Apparently you've got thin privilege. Now I weigh 13 stone 12 pounds, and that is, do the maths for me, will ya? That's 194 pounds. The BBG's in good shape, I gotta tell you. 6 foot 6 inches tall, and it's all in proportion. I've said that 1,000 times. So I'm in good shape. But apparently, I've got privilege, thin privilege now. University sports captains and fitness instructors will be banned from telling students to burn those calories or work off last night's pizza because it's fat phobic. Mandatory training on the harmful impact of weight stigma will be introduced at Bristol University this term for sport and exercise staff and students running teams. The Student Council condemned the insidious presence of diet culture at the university, highlighting phrases such as "let's slim those waists" as evidence of thin privilege. Abby Jessup, I'd love to interview Abby. She says this rhetoric is common in the fitness industry. It communicates the toxic ideals of diet culture, notably that thin equals health and exercise is only a compensatory activity to burn calories. This is genuinely going on, not just in Bristol. Cancel culture, the removal of stock phrases and sayings that have been around since Moses was in short trousers because of the idea that it might injure somebody else psychologically. Mad stuff. And if you think that's mad, also in the Mail on Sunday, MPs pay consultancy £7,000 to design unconscious bias course on woke-friendly language and history, taught by a giant blue puppet. This is not a joke. MPs will be given lessons on woke language and history by consultants who declared the words lady and pensioner to be offensive. Parliament has paid the Challenge consultancy group £7,000 to design a course on unconscious bias for MPs. In total, the company, which has also trained BBC staff, has ranked in nearly £1 million from Parliament for conduct lessons in what one MP last night called an absurd waste of taxpayers' money. An outline of the training leaked to the Mail on Sunday says MPs will be schooled on words they should avoid and also schooled on woke-friendly history. The consultancy uses a giant blue puppet called Unconscious Bias, UB, as part of the unconscious bias training. One MP told the Mail on Sunday anonymously that they were aghast at the amount of money Parliament has spent on this nonsense. Unconscious bias, what a world we are entering, eh? Self-censorship, censorship. I mean, I think ultimately that's the aim, I suppose, is, and it doesn't work on baldy gammons like me because I'm too old now, but the aim is for younger people to never say anything about anything, lest they fall foul of the cancel culture warriors and the leaders of those groups, of such groups. You know, you won't say anything in any room because you'll tie yourself up in knots beforehand, wondering if what you are going to say and the words you use might cause a meltdown in someone present, and if that then will cause embarrassment, and if it might have consequences for you. It's insane, this stuff, isn't it? It's insane. And when we first started hearing these stories, I didn't take them very seriously. I thought, it's just an isolated example of stupidity at the University of Kent or the University of Liverpool. But I was wrong. It's everywhere. Mad. I subscribe to the Manchester United Football Club television channel for a few quid a month. And I do that because you get to watch all the junior teams play their live games. You get to see the under-18s, the under-23s, you get to see the women's team. So you get a lot of live football. And I like that. I like watching the junior teams. Right. They're running ads now. Man United's own television channel. I wish I could have recorded one of the ads for you. And the ads go something like this. You've got some of the team's most senior players, like Paul Pogba, like Marcus Rashford, who's done a great job, I think, around the school meals and help for families in bad circumstances. I like Marcus Rashford. I like Paul Pogba. I like Manchester United, right. But they're doing these ads now, advising people to be very careful around mental health and to avoid using triggering words like mental and nuts and, well, that's just crazy. Again, stock phrases, you know, things we've been saying forever. And that's just mental, that. And that's just loony. And you've got these footballers now on television saying, don't use those words, because those words are powerful and they're dangerous. They're dangerous words. What are we going to do then to say that something is so ridiculous, you know, to be almost unspeakable? It's worrying stuff, isn't it? 2 stories in the Mail on Sunday, and it's all about censorship. We'll talk a little bit more about censorship in a moment, because the former Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg, who these days is the Vice President of Global Affairs for Facebook, he was on the Andrew Marr show this morning talking about censorship, and I want to talk about it too in a minute after this from Tammy Terrell and Marvin Gaye on Sunday View. How cool is that tune? Marvin Gaye, Tammy Terrell, Ain't No Mountain High Enough on the Richie Allen Radio Show Sunday View for September 6th, 2020. And a couple of interesting things before we move on to Nick Clegg. The Sunday Times running some good articles on coronavirus. Here's one today about children returning to the classroom. The headline is this. It's written by Sean Griffiths, the education editor for the Sunday Times. Lockdown's legacy, twitchy fingers in the classroom. That's the headline. After months spent glued to their games consoles, children struggle to sit still or concentrate at school. This is very interesting, right? Because of what might become of it, what this might lead into, if you catch my drift. She writes, does Sean Griffiths, many children have played computer games for so long during lockdown, their fingers and thumbs have not stopped twitching since they returned to school last week. Some schools said they have had to take children outside for runs and other forms of physical exercise to try to calm their compulsions. After nearly 6 months at home, sometimes going to bed as late as 5 o'clock in the morning, after hours spent online gaming, many children struggling to cope with the rigours of a traditional school day, some falling asleep at their desks. And they quote a guy called Steve Chalk, who is part of a group that runs 50 plus primary schools, saying it is going to take a long time, up to a term even, to get routines back into some of these children's lives. He goes on to talk about their ability to focus and concentrate, having taken a bit of a bashing in lockdown, and blaming gaming and screen time for that. How long, very interesting piece in the Sunday Times, how long before we see an avalanche of children being diagnosed as ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADD, attention deficit disorder? How long before we see more and more children? I mean, a lot of children are given that diagnosis anyway, incorrectly. But maybe we'll see an avalanche of that. That's one to watch closely. It's 11:30 now. Speaking of Nick Clegg, this is important, I think. Clegg, do I need to tell you about Clegg? He led the Lib Dems to a fairly successful election result in 2010, meaning the Lib Dems formed a coalition government with the Conservatives. They were the minority partner in the coalition government. He was deputy PM. He famously campaigned against Brexit, didn't he? And said that if he had even after he left the Lib Dems, or even after he'd resigned as leader and moved on, he was part of the whole Joe Swinson, we will cancel Brexit if we win. He went on to work for Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook. He is their vice president of global affairs, and Clegg turns up all over the place these days in that capacity, talking about Facebook and censorship and Facebook's role. So he had a fascinating chat with Andrew Marr on the Andrew Marr Show this morning. Marr asked him a number of interesting questions which we don't have the time to hear the answers to, but the whole thing can be heard on the BBC iPlayer. Marr asked him about Facebook's role in the upcoming US presidential election. Interesting stuff. He was asked about QAnon. Interesting stuff. Again, you'll have to hear the whole thing yourself on the BBC. But I was interested in the part of the discussion that dealt with so-called harmful content, conspiracy theories and fake news. Here is Nick Clegg, Vice President of Global Affairs at Facebook, in conversation with Andrew Marr today. Very interesting.
Here in the UK, there's been polling showing that 1 in 6 British people, if there is a new vaccine, won't take it, partly because they've been looking at all this stuff online. There's a very well-known example, which I'm sure you're familiar with, a chap from Florida called Brian Lee Hitchens, and he and his wife Erin were looking online, including on Facebook, and they decided that coronavirus was a hoax. So they didn't take the precautions, and now his wife Erin caught coronavirus and is dead. And he has appealed on Facebook to people to behave very differently. He said, if you have to go out, please use wisdom and don't be foolish like I was, so the same thing won't happen to you like it happened to me and my wife. Do you take responsibility for stories like that?
Right, you got the gist of that. Some guy in Florida blames Facebook for his wife's death. She died of coronavirus, allegedly. And it was her exposure. Why is that happening again? It was her exposure to fake news on Facebook that led to her being cavalier in her attitude towards safety and personal hygiene. She caught COVID, she's dead, and you've got a responsibility there. Over to Nick Clegg.
Like that.
Well, I don't think we've actually seen the post that they're referring to, so I can't comment on individual posts. But look, what we do is 3 things, and you can tell me whether you think this makes sense or not. Firstly, for hoaxes which pose imminent harm, like I said earlier, sort of bogus cures like drinking bleach, they're removed. I think between April, May and June of those 3 months, we removed about 7 million pieces of content. For stuff that is more about debate around vaccines or slides into conspiracy theories, we have about 70 fact checkers around the world, which will then look at the posts, label them, will then downgrade them on the feed. And over those 3 months, about 98 million posts have been labeled and deprecated in that way. At the same time, at the top of your feed, you will see the COVID Information Center, where Facebook has teamed up with the WHO, WHO and the CDC and have provided over 2 billion people the opportunity to look for more authoritative information. But look, if what you're suggesting is that people can't debate vaccines, of course that's difficult, because people are debating the Russian vaccine, the Chinese vaccine. Kamala Harris, just today here in the United States, Joe Biden's running mate, has said that she wouldn't trust a vaccine which is rolled out by the Trump administration before the election. So it's exceptionally difficult sometimes to protect people's freedom to talk about vaccines, and that hasn't been invented by social media. We will remember the scandals we've had in the past. We've had British scientists cast aspersions on certain child vaccines and causing great anxiety amongst parents. So in a free society, people should be able to talk about those things, but when it slides into things that really does lead to imminent physical harm, that is identified and removed as best as we can.
Well, fair enough, but I am talking about conspiracy theorists who either say that coronavirus is all made up for dark reasons and by strange purposes, or by people who say that all vaccines are designed to control you and again are malign. Those kind of things rolling across a country in the middle of a public health emergency, which we're still going through, really alarms people. And I put it to you that if you were still Deputy Prime Minister in this public health emergency in Britain, sitting around the cabinet table, you would want to bring forward legislation pretty urgently about this.
Yeah, look, I just don't. No one disagrees. So the idea that a law will fix this, no one disagrees that people do not want, the population to believe things which might lead to them not taking a vaccine when that is available. And of course, as a company, Facebook will work. We already work hand in glove with the NHS. We use WhatsApp. We use chatbots, which we've developed with the NHS. We've directed about 3.5 million people to NHS authoritative sources of information about COVID. So when there is a vaccine, and when the government and when that is officially sanctioned, of course, companies like Facebook actively want to work with the NHS and with the Ministry of the Department of Health to make sure that people know what is available to them.
Andrew Marr with Nick Clegg today, and that's one to watch very closely. We've seen in recent weeks, as much as recent months, Facebook pages, groups, enormous amount of Facebook groups where you have parents on there talking about vaccine safety and the whole area of the makeup of vaccines, the ingredients being put into vaccines and the possible harms being caused by said vaccines. Tens of thousands of groups being deleted. Clegg said clearly there they have very sophisticated artificial intelligence programs that are being inputted constantly, self-learning things that will eventually be able to remove content that is uploaded to Facebook at the speed of light. Nick Clegg, 23.5 minutes to the top of the hour. Going to take another tune. It's Sunday, you see. It's begun to rain here in Salford. Sure, we'd be lonesome without it, wouldn't we? We'd be lonely without the rain in the northwest of the UK. I'm staying with Motown for the time being. This is the Supremes and Come See About Me. Right, it's the Supremes. I've been messing around with Facebook notifications here. I don't have a Facebook page anymore. I use my friend's Facebook page, and he looks after the Richie Allen Show Facebook page. And when I do need to get on Facebook, I just use his login details. I don't have my own one. And those ping sounds you heard a moment ago were me getting incoming messages, and I thought I'd switched off those bloody things, but anyway, I hate Facebook, you see. Despise it. Have nothing to do with it, really. I was going to delete the Richie Allen Show Facebook page a couple of years ago, and enough of you cried about it and said keep it up there, even though it doesn't do very much. And Rog said he'd look after it, so I said fair enough, but it's dreadful. Ultimately, you look at what's happened. You didn't have to be a soothsayer, you didn't have to be a clairvoyant to see where Facebook was going, what it would be used for. You know, I've been talking about it for years, you know, from the point of view of it being the greatest red herring, the greatest Trojan horse ever given to the planet. Here's this lovely thing for free where you can connect with all your friends and family, when in reality what it is it's you, the user, volunteering your innermost thoughts, your movements, your desires, your loves, your hates, your likes, your dislikes. Unbelievable. The value of it, the data value to the system, to the agenda, to the elite, to the hidden hand, whatever you want to call it. And that was only the beginning of it. then of course it was going to be used to control exactly what news you get and what news you don't get, and to manipulate you into thinking certain ways about certain things. It's a terrible thing, Facebook, it really is. Right, let's move on. Lots more to talk about before midday. Welcome to the programme. If you're only joining us, good to be with you today. Very good article in the Sunday Times. Is the coronavirus still the killer it was, is the headline. Now, the Sunday Times is behind a paywall, so I can only share some of these articles by screenshotting them and putting them on Twitter. But the gist of this article, entitled, Is the Coronavirus Still the Killer It Was? The article talks about case information from Spain, Italy and the UK, showing that the virus is now allegedly more prevalent in the young and not in the old. And it's not affecting the young at all, right? And hospitalizations are way, way, way down. These countries like Spain, says the Sunday Times today, Spain might be experiencing a second wave, alleges the Sunday Times. But the second wave is far less problematic because they are finding cases in very young people, and those young people are not sick. We've been saying this, haven't we? You and me and others for a long time now. Vast majority of people who have coronavirus anyway don't even realise they have it, or they have very mild symptoms. Second wave, but it's not affecting people. Back to Andrew Marr. He asked the BBC chief political correspondent Vicky Young for her take on this. You will hear Andrew Marr first, of course.
Vicky, before we get onto all of that, we are, of course, all back after the summer holidays and the break. And there's a lot of confusion, it strikes me, about where we really are on COVID. The number of infections is going down, but I walk around the streets and people are ignoring social distancing completely, almost everywhere I go.
Yeah, I mean, I think the rules are confusing because obviously unlocking is much more difficult than locking down, isn't it? But what's really interesting is that the number of infections seem to be rising, but actually the number of hospitalisations and deaths are not. And that does seem to be a pattern in some other EU countries as well. Now, there are many reasons why people think that that is the case. Partly it's younger people who are now seem to be testing positive for COVID. They're less likely to get seriously ill from it. The other option is...
They're not less likely to get seriously ill from COVID. They are extremely unlikely. Not less likely. Extremely unlikely. It's like Radio 5 presenter Nicky Campbell said on his programme, well, the programme he co-presents the other morning. 21-year-old had it. It barely brushed her, he said. Felt a bit tired for the day. She'd had a test that said that she had COVID, but she wasn't really ill. So you're extremely unlikely to be ill if you're young.
The other option is that, there's better treatment for people who are going into hospital, and so the survival rates are better. But I think...
What treatment is she referring to? Does anybody know? Survival rates are better because treatment in hospitals is better. I'd love to know what the data is there. I'd love to get some proof of that. What treatment? Are they treating this virus now in some new and radical way than they've treated viruses previously? Because I can't find online any references to new treatments for COVID.
That doesn't stop the anxiety, the fact that obviously younger people getting it can still spread it to older people. But I do wonder whether what is happening is almost self-regulation, that those who are most vulnerable are actually, they are following the rules. The ones we're seeing out and about are the people maybe not following the rules so much, but those who do feel vulnerable are keeping away.
And as the Sunday Times piece there suggests rather bleakly, quite a lot of the most vulnerable people have already died.
Yeah, so the fact that the most vulnerable, particularly those in care homes, have already sadly died.
Yes, and why were people in care homes dying? It was unnecessary. You should reiterate that every time. It's not, they didn't die because they were vulnerable. They died because they were locked into bedrooms and rooms, windows and doors bolted down, and then older people were left out of hospitals, not tested and sent into those care homes. That's the reason.
Those vulnerable people aren't around so much. That doesn't mean, though, that the fears for the winter, which we know that there's a lot of anxiety about, because of course, people aren't going to be outside in the parks come November and having a good time.
A lot of people will say, if the number of deaths rates is so low and has stayed so low for so long now, why aren't we all going back to work and aren't behaving normally? And that, I imagine, is going to be a big political row over the next few weeks.
Good question, right? Nobody is dying from this anymore. They're not. People are not dying from it. The people who are getting it are not getting sick from it. So it's a very good question. Why not just say, look, all right, it's over now. Be done with it. Let's go back to February 2020. Forget about it. Why? Good question.
Next few weeks.
Yeah, and that is an argument that very much is raging, particularly within the Conservative Party. Some of them looking at these figures and saying this is complete madness. Why aren't we just completely back to normal, opening up? But there does seem to be a reluctance by some to go back to the office. They don't necessarily think it's safe. And I think that's the thing you can't underplay here. There are a lot of people still incredibly anxious about all of this, particularly going into the winter.
Yes, because Vicky, you and your colleagues' fear porn has worked very well. People are genuinely terrified of this virus. They are. We know they are because we walk among them. You see them in the streets with their masks on. You see them in the shops. Terrified people. And that's why it's easy for the government to, while people are not dying from it, while people are not going to hospital from it, it remains relatively easy for the government to get people to obey the increasingly more and more arbitrary rules and regulations around this virus, which, whatever it is or was, is mostly gone now. Mad times. 12 minutes to at the top of the hour. Andrew Marr with Vicky Young there. Sunday Telegraph claims an exclusive this morning. It says, exclusive: GPs texting patients to urge social distancing when fears area could go into lockdown. This is an allegation that doctors are sending text messages to their patients, telling them, warning them that they better do a bit more social distancing to keep the R rate low in their area. Staggering stuff, this. The text message reads, presumably, "Dear Mr. Allen or Dear Mrs. Smith, we have a slight increase in cases in our area. Keep your distance from people outside your household and minimise visits with other houses indoors." I mean, this is totalitarianism. It's mental. The oft-mentioned Jean Ann Crowley sent me an email the other morning to a link to a story in the Journal in Ireland. This is insane. Restaurants and pubs that serve food in Ireland are not only being urged to gather the names and addresses of the customers and the diners who come to eat, they are being asked by the Irish government to also record and keep on file for a month exactly what those customers ordered. What the fuck does any of that have to do with keeping people safe from a virus? If there was a deadly virus, keep their orders on file. We want to know what they had to eat. And apparently one or two restaurateurs and one or two publicans in Ireland are telling the government where to stick that request. I mean, this is insane stuff, isn't it? Insane. Speaking of the Sunday Times, it's getting a lot of coverage this morning by us, the Sunday Times. It's run a series of articles last week and this week about the inhumanity of preventing people from visiting their elderly relatives in care homes. How the isolation is killing people. Killing them. It's breaking their hearts. They're dying of loneliness. It's a plague worse than any virus, one woman said in a letter to the Sunday Times. The leaving old people on their own, without access to their children and their grandchildren. It's shocking. And in today's Sunday Times, there is a claim that care homes fear being sued by relatives if residents catch COVID from visitors. It's shocking stuff. And it's summed up by Lynn from Trafford, just around the corner. She phoned BBC Radio the other day and said this, Lynn.
This is inhuman. It's inhuman to do this, to ignore the importance of some kind of contact with our loved ones while they're having dementia. Trevor's clock's ticking. He's not going to be here forever. This time's being wasted. Dementia sufferers matter. And all those in care homes matter, and they deserve better. And they're being let down again.
They're being abandoned. Remember Lorraine phoning the phone-in show last time he did one, talking about her brother who's since sadly passed on. and the fact that they weren't allowed to spend much time with him, and they feared they wouldn't be with him when he passed on, and those fears became reality. They weren't with him when he passed on. These are dreadful, dreadful things that are happening. It's 8 minutes to the top of the hour. You have the Speaker of the House of Commons, Lindsay, what's the guy's, Lindsay Hoyle, is it? Hoyle, I think it's Lindsay Hoyle. He's been telling the BBC that maybe MPs, members of Parliament, maybe they should be tested for COVID every single day. Every single day. We should test them. And by doing that, we might be able to get more MPs back into the chamber and give a more normal view of proceedings to the watching public, bring about normality. Maybe we should get them tested every day. Now, don't forget, this comes hot on the heels, there's a cliche for you, of the Health Secretary Matt Hancock last week telling us that weekly testing for people without symptoms would become the norm going forward. They've developed a saliva test, and they want us all in the future to submit our saliva for testing once a week. That, of course, then will open up society even more, said the Health Secretary. Because if you're producing a specimen of your saliva every week, well, then we know that you're not COVID positive this week. So this week you can go to the supermarket, you can go to the cinema, so on, so on, so on, so on. Tyranny. You might wonder why the national media hasn't challenged any of this. And you know the answer. You know, the short answer is over a period of 3.5 decades, media plurality has disappeared. I've spent hours and hours and hours talking about it on the Richie Allen Radio Show and other shows. Gone. Tiny group of corporations managed to basically take ownership of the world's mass media. That's the short answer. But there are other answers as well. And Eamon Holmes is an interesting character. He's a Northern Irish television presenter and radio presenter. And some of you will know him because he did some pretty fair interviews with David Icke last year. Or maybe it was 2018, I can't remember. Because time flies. In his capacity as a presenter for talk radio, he brought David on and was fair and respectful with him in 35, 40-minute interviews. And Holmes seems to be prepared to push the boat out in terms of what he's prepared to say. And him and his wife, Ruth Langford, I think her name is, they work with Philip Schofield and Holly Willoughby. They present This Morning, which is an ITV mid-morning magazine programme. Eamon Holmes and his wife Ruth, they do that show a couple of days a week as far as I can understand. And on Friday morning, he had Denise Welch on, the actress. And Denise Welch has been very vocal about the lies around coronavirus. This actress, very brave woman. And I think Denise Welch is also a host of Loose Women as well. Not a big thing now for daytime television. You know, I listen to news radio and television news. But anyway, Denise Welch is pissed off at the media. And in conversation with Eamon Holmes says this to Denise Welch.
See, Denise, this is all quite complicated because this is a time of national emergency. And as I know from myself at the start of all of this, you're not allowed to question the narrative on such things. So
you're not allowed to question the narrative on such things. This is a journalist now, very well paid journalist who for years presented Sky News Breakfast before Kay Birdie presented it. Going back before that, he presented Good Morning Britain for years. This is one of the most well-known television presenters in the UK.
All of this, you're not allowed to question the narrative on such things. So there are restrictions on publications, there are restrictions on broadcasters, and there will be a lot of people saying that you are simply rabble-rousing, you're creating panic.
It's all part of the Coronavirus Act, you see. that the government, the Home Office, can impose restrictions on reporting. In effect, tell journalists, listen, there's a deadly virus here. You're not to entertain any question. You're not to entertain any questioning of that story. You're not to allow a platform where people challenge the narrative. Coronavirus Act, where the government can tell newspapers and journalists and television presenters, whom are there, ironically, to hold the government to account, the government can say, you can't or shouldn't be asking questions about this because it's a public health issue and people's lives are at stake, so shut up, effectively.
As I know from myself at the start of all of this, you're not allowed to question the narrative on such things. So there are restrictions on publications, there are restrictions on broadcasters, and there will be a lot of people saying that you are simply rabble-rousing, you're creating panic with all of this.
How am I creating panic, Eamon? I'm giving the data, which the other day I said, Doncaster Hospital celebrates 8 weeks without a COVID case. Someone put, oh, I'm sick of this, you're disgusting. Is that not great? Do you know why? Because when the flu season comes, the NHS is overwhelmed every single year, particularly in years like 2017, 2018, when 30,000 people died, excess deaths related to flu and cold conditions. We never heard about that because none of us knew this rolling count thing. It happens every year.
I'm going to play this again. Share this with everybody that you're in contact with on social media. Just the first bit. It's very important.
See, Denise, this is all quite complicated because this is a time of national emergency. And as I know from myself at the start of all of this, you're not allowed to question the narrative on such things. So there are restrictions on publications, there are restrictions on broadcasters, and there will be...
But there's no restrictions on the BBG. I'll see you tomorrow, Monday at 5 o'clock. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Bye from me. Bye now.